Good evening. This is Bryce Hall, and this is my presentation on academic language in mathematics. First off, what is academic language? In my words, it's language used by teachers and students for the purpose of acquiring new knowledge and skills. It increases conceptual understanding and procedural fluency, especially in mathematics. Academic language helps describe abstract and more complex ideas, as well as it increases academic vocabulary. What academic language is not it's not your conversational or day-to-day language. For example, it's definitely not the language students would use when texting a friend or generally when talking to them on the phone or each other out on the playground, etc. According to the EdTPA handbook, academic language is the oral and written language used for academic purposes. Academic language is the language of the discipline used to engage students in learning and includes the means by which students develop and express content understanding. Furthermore, from the EdTPA handbook, teacher candidates are asked to address academic language the following ways, as our 3SB lesson plan does very well and in detail. First is to identify a key language function and one essential learning task within their learning segment lesson plans that allows students to practice the function. The second is identify vocabulary and one additional language demand, i.e. discourse or syntax, related to the language function and learning task. And third, identify and describe the instructional and or language supports they have planned to address the language demands. Excuse me. Now, academic language in mathematics. It promotes critical thinking and problem-solving skills through use of academic conversation. And one thing that I like and find very useful and interesting is the new Common Core curriculum. It has an increased emphasis on academic language based on my experience compared to previous curricula, especially compared to the curriculum that I was introduced to when I was in high school, which was more a strictly lecture-based curriculum where the teacher lectured, the students listened, took notes, did our homework, and then took a test. There was very little group work or interaction between the students, especially in the mathematics classroom. So Common Core has a lot more group work, more written, though small, has more written assignments where the students describe the math that they are using to solve the problems they are attempting. Also, one thing I have observed is that the problems are presented in a way that the students have to think a lot more critically about how to solve them, as opposed to using the older rogue memorization techniques to just memorize, regurgitate, and apply various seemingly random equations. Furthermore, some examples of academic language in secondary math, according to the EdTPA, are as follows. As mentioned earlier, the first being language function, which is the purpose for which language is used. One example is students will be able to explain what strategy or strategies they use to solve a problem. Another, students will be able to describe the specific attributes of a parallelogram. Again, these are specifically for secondary mathematics, middle school and high school, because that is what I will be teaching. The second is vocabulary. A couple examples here: compare, analyze, evaluate, describe, sequences, classify. More exponent, numerator, denominator, equilateral, divisor, least common multiple, and then of course the common mathematic symbols used in secondary mathematics. Now these are just a few random vocabulary words that I'm using as an example. The next example, as mentioned earlier, in language demands is discourse, which is how members of the discipline talk, write, and participate in knowledge construction. 3 examples are constructing an argument, for example, a 2-column proof that would be used in a geometry class, interpreting graphic representations, i.e. graphs, diagrams, scatter plots, etc., and making and supporting a conjecture, as students do with theorems and other things like that in higher level courses such as calculus. And last example is another language demand, which is syntax, which is the rules for organizing words or symbols together into phrases, clauses, sentences, or visual representations. The first example, in general, is long or elaborate noun phrases. Specific example is write an inequality that, when solved, will give the amount of sales Mandy needs to cover her planned expenses. Second general example, conditional sentences. A specific example of that is if 50% of a number is 25, then what is 75% of that number? So there were just a few examples of academic language and how it applies to secondary mathematics. So in summary, a quick summary, academic language is the use of language function, vocabulary, language demands, and specific language support by teachers and students to help those students acquire new skills and knowledge and help those students participate themselves in academic conversations inside and ideally outside of the classroom. And here's a fun little high school math pun. It's the number 8, saying, "Don't you think you guys should stop fighting? You're both being irrational." And in case you're not familiar, pi and the square root of 2 are both irrational numbers because their decimals just go on and there's no actual end to the decimal value. So thought that was a fun little thing to add there. And another example that students just reading over that can use something simple like this to promote the use of academic language within the classroom. Thank you. Good night.